And welcome back to America's Forum here on Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman.
I'm J.D. Hayworth. Morgan Thompson is here, and we're pleased to have you, Morgan, but the subject matter we're going to talk about is very disturbing.
Yes, it is. We're talking about the terrible shooting in Kansas that killed 3 people. Federal authorities have said they will file hate crime charges against alleged shooter Frazier Glenn Cross. They see even though the victims were Christian, it's unquestionably determined that this crime was motivated by hate, specifically a hate of Jews.
In general terms, from an evidentiary standpoint, and that's why we will not be specific in telling you what he said, but we have some statements that were made that allow us to believe that it was in that direction. Again, I can't tell you what those were.
When the suspect was in the back of the patrol car, he shouted Heil Hitler, and he had a long history of hate speech, specifically anti-Semitic speech for decades. He had been a Ku Klux Klan leader and an extremist candidate for the Senate in the past.
Thanks, Morgan. So the question now becomes, what made this person, a person with this kind of background, finally go over the edge, if you will, and commit these acts of violence?
Absolutely.
And that's why we are pleased to have a special guest with us, Dr. Michael Brannon. Dr. Brannon, you bring considerable expertise to this, and we want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me today.
Well, the first question is, what, for lack of a better term, drove this guy to finally act on impulses that he had voiced in some manner in the public square for several decades?
There's a lot of things that result in someone killing someone or several people. A lot of it has to do with their depersonalization of other individuals, them seeing them as things or groups. In this particular instance, a group of people is easier to kind of depersonalize as opposed to I'm going to control or do something to this individual. But also a legacy of hate that's reinforced by other people is important to know about it. It lowers the threshold, if you will, for what people are willing to do to other people and allows them to justify or rationalize their behavior when there's others, in this case the Ku Klux Klan, who may reinforce that and feel the same way. They may even feel that they're doing something godly or doing something that saves their country by taking care of this particular group and acting in that particular manner.
Now, this specific person, Mr. Cross, he has a very long history of this. He was, released from the military way back in '79
Yes.
because of his anti-Semitic and racist beliefs. How is it that he is able, I mean, obviously it's a free country, but, we closely monitor Islamic extremists, all kinds of groups that we believe are terrorist threats. Clearly he's a threat and has been for a very long time. Why wasn't he more closely monitored?
There's a number of problems in terms of threat assessment. Most people who threaten don't follow through on threats. And we like to live kind of in a bubble that tells us other people won't do bad things to us or to other people. They're talking, they're blowing off hot wind, they're doing whatever it is that they would ordinarily do in their day to express their anger, but they really won't do that. We put that thought out of our mind. The other thing is that prediction of who's actually going to do this is not very accurate. Even the best of professionals have a very difficult time predicting who will actually act upon those threats or that hate speech, if you will. So it's difficult to predict. We don't like to think that people will do it, but even more so, it takes a lot more to push someone over that threshold of hate.
Okay.
It's very dangerous to deal with any kinds of stereotypes here, yet there are people trying to look at, quote, tendencies and any strain of commonality. Now there's some speculation emerging that rural versus urban people, that folks who, for lack of a better term, live in the country might be more predisposed to this kind of behavior. Any veracity to that?
As opposed to being geographical, we'd say that someone who's more isolated is more likely to start to think about violent, aggressive thoughts and then be able to carry those out in a systematic way or plan those things. Before most people kill, they rehearse those things, especially those who are agenda-based. They rehearse them in their brain. This is why this is justified. This is what I'll do. This is why I think I should continue to do those things. So those who are more isolated have less of a chance of getting them talked out of those things, if you will, or hearing contradictory viewpoints.
Now, I know you do a lot of legal work and you are a speaker in a lot of legal cases. Do you think he's legally sane?
Well, it's always difficult to say without speaking to somebody, but certainly he appears to have had goal-directed behavior. He did what he said he was going to do. He took care of a target that was in front of him, and he could appreciate, too, it appears, that he was going to be arrested and taken away for this. So his comments there are consistent with his behavior. So again, I can't comment on him particularly. I didn't interview him.
Right.
But there isn't anything to suggest yet that he may have met the criteria for insanity.
Okay.
And we're talking about that mental health aspect of this, Dr. Brannon. After the fact, we hear him yell from that police car the words "Hail Hitler."
Yes.
You know, as you address people who have just recently killed somebody and you're brought in to interview them, in a situation like this, again, knowing that you have not assessed him, but when you see somebody do something like that, yell something to the TV cameras, what does that say to you?
Well, it's very important when you're doing a mental health evaluation to see what the person did immediately after the crime. For instance, if he would have said, "Hitler made me do this," that's very different than "Heil Hitler." So, or the devil forced me to do this, or talk me, or they're the devil and I need to go out and cleanse the earth of the devils. That's a little different kind of speech than Heil Hitler. It's kind of a reinforcing of, see this is kind of the group norm that I live by. These are bad people, we're the good people, and I'm going to eliminate them.
Let me shift scenes and incidents, and I use the term incidents especially in this case because I don't want to characterize something as a crime that technically could be an act of war. That's a year ago, the Boston Marathon bombing. And my question is not so much about what drove the, quote, domestic terrorists from Chechnya, but the reaction of people in Boston, the Boston Globe with almost sympathetic reporting, and the spectacle of women writing the surviving bomber as if he is some sort of matinee idol or someone who is misunderstood. Doc, what's up with that kind of perverse attraction to these monsters?
There are, for some people, a popularization, if you will, of people who commit these kinds of crimes. They become, in some ways, anti-heroes. They become people who other people look up to. There's even cards that you can buy that are serial killer cards, where you can actually collect serial killers. So for some people, and I think the media lends some to that, in that we tend to report a lot on those kinds of things. We can't help but not to, but then again, the bottom line is that people see that, they gravitate towards it, and they empathize with it in some ways, and that leads to many times copycat type of incidents.
Well, to follow up on this, the notion, especially with I guess an imagined romantic relationship,
Sure.
The term may be a little quaint, but prison malls, women who are motivated
Yes.
to try and reach out. Is this some sort of notion that they could reform this person?
Or that they aggrandize their own lives. They feel through association with this anti-hero, this bad guy, if you will, that it somehow makes them feel more important or have a better stature, that somehow they feel insignificant or have a low self-esteem, and this somehow adds to it. It's better to have some type of identification, even if it's a negative one, than no identification at all.
And getting back to the offenders themselves, if I may borrow your term, these monsters, how are they created? What is the type of situation that somebody can not only breathe this sort of hatred, but also feel justified to act upon it?
It usually is a series of steps. It's a person who certainly may come up in a family setting in which those type of values are reinforced, or lack of values, we might say, or anger and hatred and rejection of others for things like their religious preference or their culture or their skin color. It becomes an area where we can make us group versus their groups. It's us versus them. And many times that gets reinforced by other people they associate with throughout the course of their lives, and also fascinations with things like violence, weapons, wars, those kinds of things. Like, for instance, in this particular incident, you had a son who was killed several years before. So there's an exposure to violence and guns and aggression that reinforces those behaviors.
Okay.
Dr. Michael Brannon, we appreciate your insights on this, because always it seems we are trying to make sense out of the senseless. And certainly the background that you bring in terms of forensic psychology is very, very greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Now, when we come back, there are other things we have to talk about. We had this incident in Overland Park, Kansas, but what about anti-Semitism around the world? We'll take a look at that issue and speak with the Deputy National Director for the Anti-Defamation League. That is coming up after the break. And always, we invite your discussion. You can join us via social media, tweeting us your questions at Newsmax TV, #AmericasForum. That's the name of the program. It continues after this.